Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment. Now, one of the most common arguments I hear against a convention of states is that that somehow, there's gonna be a runaway convention, and somehow we are there's something. It's suggested that there's something wrong with our Constitution. There is nothing wrong with our Constitution. What the problem is how our Constitution has been applied in many instances. That's the problem. If you go back through our history, there is a plethora of decisions from our institutions, in particular our Supreme Court, that run afoul of the Constitution. I mean, I can just name a few real briefly. Dred Scott, which imposed slavery across the entirety of the United States. Plessy versus Ferguson, which imposed the principle of separate but equal. Decisions such as the Korematsu decision, which during World War II imposed and allowed for internment camps of Japanese Americans in our United States. Roe v. Wade. All of these are decisions that were completely wrong, that were a failure of our institutions. We have a runaway debt right now. And I fear for whether our country can survive if we're going at this route. I want to have a country that survives for my kids with $28 trillion. Now, the fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves is, can we trust the federal government to limit itself? My answer to that is no. Time and time again, the federal government has failed to limit its own powers. If we're talking about the budget, if we're talking about depriving people of due process, if we're talking about civil liberties, time and time again, the federal government has failed. And we're talking about a structure that's set up that has perfectly fine mechanisms to keep this convention in check. It's outlined in the actual bill as to what those checks would be. And, if a bill, and I just want to be clear on this point, if an amendment makes it through this process, we're talking about 3/4 of the states have to approve any proposed amendment, then 3/4 of the states, those amendments would go back to the states, and 3/4, 75% of the states would have to pass it. So I think this is a very, very appropriate amendment to the bill. And I think this is a way that we can send a message that we need to put a check on Washington, D.C. I urge adoption of the amendment.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.